if the government wants to do one thing, not many, just one thing which you think would really have a real impact in making sure that infrastructure procurement is optimized. That means we get the value for money while we, of course, at the same time prevent all these unethical practices like corruption that we have just mentioned. So what do you think would be the first big step the government should take? I'm sure there are many interventions, but which one do you think will be more far-reaching and the most important?
Thanks.
Right. Okay. Should I start?
No. Can we have Sibani go on this? Let him have a first go on this one, Sibani.
Okay.
As a public servant, I think we just want one idea.
All right, thank you very much for the question once again. Well, it is quite a very difficult question in a sense that to just choose one option. I'm very torn between the number of available avenues that the government can look at with regards to addressing this matter. Well, for me, if I have to really choose, I'd say that one of the issues that I found with public procurement is that, in as far as infrastructure is concerned, is that there is lack of standardization when it comes to documentation, especially which pertain to tender documentation, whether it's specifications or criteria that relate to what are we looking for if we want to build a dam of this size. I mean, in my mind, there should be a standard document, a standard detail that's going to say, with this kind of construction, for instance, we want a company which has X, Y, and Z in terms of resources, that is people, that is machinery, all sorts of things. Because I raise this because with especially setting strategy, which would then be used to assess the responsiveness of the tenderers, it's not standard. If especially with the fact that sometimes the built environment professionals do not necessarily play a really huge role when it comes to the procurement side of it in government institutions. You have multi-players and many of whom lack the actual experience when it comes to the built environment. So I think that standardization of these standards and criteria would really help, so that at least we know that we are going to get quality suppliers that are going to be able to give us value for money when it comes to public procurement. And I think that the way in which the government can do this is through the public procurement bill that has been published for comment. I think that obviously what I'm saying is not from what I've read in the bill, is not really addressed, especially with regards to the standardization of this part of it, the functionality, the criteria in which we select potential suppliers who are going to be able to help us deliver these infrastructure projects. So for me, that would just be the first thing that I think would really have a major impact, is to actually standardize these criteria that, okay, Sibani knows that if he's putting out a project which is a prison that is going to accommodate 500 inmates, what kind of company or what kind of supplier can do this work, keeping in mind the fact that obviously the government wants to promote a mass participation of different suppliers and not just existing companies, as it were, but also to meet the preferential goals of the department of the government. So keeping that in mind, for me, that would be it. I think that I think that's it for.
Yeah, I'm sure you have a lot to say, but we restrain you on the one. So Ronnie, if you had the opportunity to advise government, what is the one thing that they could do to be efficient in terms of infrastructure procurement?
Yes. Look, for me, okay, I think Sibani was right to say there's quite a number of issues that really could be addressed, but obviously in this case, just to pick one that's important. And for me, it's transparency. It's transparency in the entire procurement process. From the time you determine what is it that you need to procure to the time you award and you take into account the performance of the people that you actually appointed to deliver them. You know what that does? It helps government in two ways. It helps them if they do something right. The public has access to see that actually, if you went to this department, they actually did this right. It was best practice, and that helps in a sense that any other institution within government, whether national, provincial, or local government on SOE, you are able to see what is right. I'm saying this partly because I was lucky enough to once work for the municipality. I did a consulting project for, and it was really around procurement. And the sadness of the situation was the fact that they couldn't even tell. They've read, you could tell that they've read something around procurement and of course and stuff, but they don't have any model way to set up different ways in which other guys have done it. And that goes back perhaps to the question of standardization, in a sense that, if things are standardized and they are more transparent, it's easy to know who does not know what and what's best practice. You can't tell what is best practice if, as things stand, you don't know who's doing what and how are they doing it, or how their procurement process looks like. That's just on a high level from a government point of view, but even private sector has a huge role to play in as far as procurement or the procurement of construction services is concerned. My view is that, look, even in private sector, you never really know how the larger procurers in the private space actually procure their services. They could call it whatever they might call it. They can say, okay, no, we're doing negotiated processes and so forth. Okay, that's fine. Everyone can choose how they want to procure their services or how they want to appoint their contractors. But what actually creates competition and what builds interest in an industry is the ability to know with certainty that this is how the market works. These are the processes within the market. You don't have to know the CEO of whoever in order to participate in a particular procurement process. If the process does not allow you to be included in it, you'd rather not necessarily, you'd rather know that, okay, I don't qualify on the basis that I don't have, let's say, for example, ISO 14,000 certification. Maybe what I need to do is get ISO 14,000 certification, then I will then work with these guys. But if you keep the process unknown and obscure, or you only put in some level of detail outside in the market, you are actually not only disadvantaging the organization you are trying to procure the services for, you are actually dealing with the ability of the construction sector to innovate and grow at scale. Partly because if some guys don't know what other clients want, they might not even do those things, partly because they've always worked with clients of a particular nature and they don't know where the standard is set. So when you open up procurement in that fashion, it helps, but also from the decisions that government have to take, the bid adjudication committees, the bid evaluation committees, up until the guys that actually are involved in the contract, that kind of information, however it may be, however sensitive that people might think it is, but one of the most important things to spur change and spur innovation in the industry, you require some form of radical innovation, especially if government at this particular point, or the government of the day, actually wants to inspire public confidence in how they do anything. Even from a research in academia, I do think that one of the problems in researching how procurement works is actually the lack of information around procurement for any of the projects. Government would be happy to, they would appoint a contractor for a 2 billion hospital, and you would know who's awarded that contract, And the next time you're going to hear about what's going on with the contract is when the media is now on their back for some irregularities around what's going on. But from a best practice point of view, there is absolutely no need. Well, there is a need because lack of transparency helps in as far as corruption is concerned, and it's able to create an environment where corruption can actually thrive. But look, the truth of the matter is that my view is that contract information for public project should be out there, from who is the project manager from a government point of view, who is the QS, who is the consultant, every single person, including the subcontractors. That should be information that's publicly available, so that even if you sit down, you are able to try and, if you are trying to figure out, or you're trying to do it from an independent point of view to figure out who always gets appointed in this contract, you're trying to figure out what's happening in the value chain. You need to be able to know that, okay, so this guy always wins the contract, but more often than not, the subcontractors they appoint, there's a pattern of the guys that are always appointed. You are then able to then talk about issues of transformation. You are then able to talk about a host of other issues. You are able to start research programs and all these other things, partly because the visibility of the participants within the infrastructure space is always out there. And the type of information that's required, even for the media, to hold government accountable is always there. It only just requires someone to sit there, analyze and say, connect the dots, who's doing what and so forth, and be able to then have an active public that's able to hold individuals accountable. So for me, I've suggested it a couple of times to a lot of people, and it's not an idea that anyone actually thinks is a priority. They just think it's a whole lot of work from the side of whoever will be procuring the information. But there are already cases of this. For example, there's an organization called Infrastructure Transparency, or it's part of Transparency International, but it's more focused on infrastructure. I'm just not certain what's the name. And there's also another initiative, mostly this is actually advanced for most World Bank funded projects. And these projects, when they are funded by the World Bank, they are required to comply to a particular data standard where they need to submit certain types of information, publicize it now and then to reflect the progress in the project, not only for the client, but for the public, the people who actually are the ones who ultimately fund these public infrastructure projects. So in a nutshell, my view is that, look, probably I just touched on just 2 or 3 areas, but transparency in the procurement process, from the time you decide what is it that you want to procure, or from the time government or a government entity decides on a strategic plan that they will have for the next 5 years, it should be clear what is it that government wants to do. It helps businesses decide, should I enter this market and position myself for contracts, let's say on roads, SANRAL related projects. If they know that beforehand what types of projects will be done, it helps from the business planning point of view. It also helps from an integrity building point of view in as far as government is concerned. So for now, there's a host lot of things I could say about this, but I'll just leave it there so we can move to other questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie. Look, transparency is a big thing, but I think the reason why there's a resistance to it is, there's a lot of loopholes are going to be closed, a lot of eating, so to say, is going to be exposed, and that's probably why when you speak to people, nobody listens to, or it's not like they don't know it. Chances are it's not in their interest. it's not in their